You know, when we think about Christmas, it's easy to picture this sudden magical event, right? A star just appears out of nowhere, angels start singing, and poof, history changes overnight. But what if the story of that manger wasn't some last-minute rescue mission? What if, according to the scriptures, the first Christmas was never plan B? What if it was always, from the very beginning, plan A? So get this. The Apostle Paul kicks off his letter to the Romans with this incredible line. And the key phrase, the one that changes everything, is promised beforehand. This wasn't some afterthought. This was the grand finale of a promise that was thousands of years in the making. It completely reframes the whole Christmas story, not as a sudden miracle, but as a promise finally, breathtakingly kept. So you gotta ask, right? If this was such an old promise, where in the world did it all begin? Well, to really understand the baby in the manger, we have to rewind. And I mean way back, further than Bethlehem. We have to go all the way back to the very beginning. And our story starts in probably the last place you'd expect, a garden. Right at that moment when everything broke, when humanity fell and the world fractured, God's very first response wasn't instant judgment. It was a promise. It's got this fancy name, the Proto-Evangelium, which literally just means the first gospel or the first good news. And think about that for a second. Right in the middle of all that wreckage and failure, the very first thing humanity hears is this whisper of hope, a promise that a rescuer would come from mankind, the seed of the woman, and he would one day deal a final crushing blow to the source of all evil. And this wasn't some one-and-done promise that got lost to time. No way. As you can see here, it just echoed down through the centuries. It was passed from one generation to the next, it was repeated to Abraham, it got a little clearer through Jacob, and then, wow, the prophet Isaiah adds these stunningly specific details. It's like for thousands of years, all of history was just holding its breath, waiting. Now, as the world waited, God did something really cool. He didn't just leave people with words on a page. He gave them living, breathing pictures, or as the source material calls them, mirrors. These were real people whose lives acted like a shadow of the real Savior who was still to come. Here's a simple way to think about it. If you see a shadow on the ground, you know for a fact that something real is casting it, right? Well, these historical figures, they were the shadows. They were proof that the substance was coming. And Christmas, that's the moment the substance, the reality, finally walked into the room. Let's take a look at a few of these. They're pretty amazing. First up, you've got these incredible bookends to the story. Adam. The first Adam fails in a garden, and through him, death enters the world. Then comes Christ, who's called the second Adam, and where does he find victory? In another garden, Gethsemane, and he brings life. It's just a perfect, beautiful reversal. Then you've got Isaac. This story is just wild. He obediently carries the wood for his own sacrifice up a mountain. Centuries later, the greater Isaac, Christ, carries a wooden cross up a hill in that very same mountain range, in perfect obedience to his father. The parallel there is just, it's breathtaking. But what about Joseph? He's betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, left for dead. But what happens? He's eventually elevated to this incredible position of power where he ends up saving the very people who wronged him. I mean, talk about a shadow of Christ, betrayed by his own, and then resurrected to offer salvation to the whole world. And finally, there's King David, Israel's greatest king, a shepherd king, a man after God's own heart. But let's be honest, he was deeply flawed, and his kingdom was temporary. Christ is the true son of David, the perfect shepherd king whose kingdom will never, ever end. Okay, so we've seen the ancient promise and all these shadows pointing toward it. But that brings us to the central question, doesn't it? Why? Why was all this necessary? Why such an elaborate plan stretching across thousands of years? The answer lies in just how serious the problem was. I mean, really, why couldn't we just fix things ourselves? Why did God have to step in such a personal and dramatic way? This question gets right to the heart of why Christmas absolutely had to happen. To get the solution, you have to get the problem. And in the biblical view, sin isn't just a simple mistake or a bad choice. The language used is much stronger. It's like cosmic treason. It created an infinite debt against a perfectly holy God. And no amount of good works, no amount of trying harder could ever begin to pay that debt back. We were completely and utterly stuck. So here's the divine solution, broken down into 3 parts. First, the problem. The law, the list of rules was perfect, but we weren't. We were too weak to keep it. We couldn't save ourselves. Second, the action.
God did for us what we could never do for ourselves. He sent his own son to become one of us in Bethlehem. And third, the result. In that human body, Jesus took the full penalty for our sin, essentially condemning it so that we wouldn't have to be.
And this massive, cosmic solution has a deeply personal, incredibly intimate result. This isn't just about some legal transaction in a heavenly courtroom. It's about being invited into a family. This right here, this is the great exchange at the absolute heart of Christmas. The Son of God became one of us so that we, broken as we are, could become children of God. He came down to our level so that we could be lifted up to his. And just listen to the emotion in this verse. The whole dynamic shifts. We're no longer like terrified slaves afraid of a harsh master. Through Jesus, we get this spirit of adoption. We can approach the God of the universe with the intimacy of a little kid crying out, Abba, Father. It changes absolutely everything. So, what does this actually mean for us? It means we get to make some incredible trades. We trade our fear for his peace. We trade our slavery to sin for adoption into his family. We trade all that deep uncertainty about life and death for an unshakable hope. And we trade the verdict of condemned for the promise of no separation, ever. But it is so crucial that we understand this. The manger, as beautiful and central as it is not the end of the story. It's really just the beginning of the final act. You see, the same prophets who predicted his first coming also predicted a second one. The first time, he arrived in humility, in a manger, as a savior. The next time, the promise says, he will return in power, on the clouds, as judge. The promise kept at Christmas is also a guarantee of a promise that is still to come. And that leaves us with this final, powerful thought. The joy of Christmas is really twofold. It's looking back in celebration of a promise fulfilled. The Lord has come. And it's looking forward with this confident hope of a promise yet to be fulfilled. The Lord will come again. The story that began with a whisper and a garden, well, it isn't over yet.